Hey, my name's ShawNshawN. I sell art on ShawNshawN.co and specials on eBay. Today we're going to review Tenet. So this is a film by Christopher Nolan, kind of the guy who did Batman and some other films. He did that World War II film, I can't think of the name, but well edited. Time is 2 hours and a half, so you're like, kind of a long film. Actors are John David Washington as the protagonist, kind of the lead character. Robert Patterson is Neil, this guy kind of helping him out from MI6. Elizabeth Kebicki is Kat, this gangster's wife, young wife. Kenneth Branagh plays Andrei Sator, kind of the lead villain. So the story starts with the Russia opera is getting taken over by terrorists. The Russian federal police are kind of surround the building and enter the building, but at the same time, this secret CIA group is kind of inserted with the Russians and try to rescue an operative in there and then pull him out. The whole team from the CIA gets caught inside of the building. There's some kind of bomb going off and they kind of rescue all the bomb parts and they get taken out. They're getting tortured. Two of these guys are getting tortured. One guy's already kind of died supposedly, but then he's kind of still has alive. He pulls out the suicide pill. The other guy sees it. He falls on the ground, takes the suicide pill, and then boom, he wakes up in the hospital. So at this point, he's been inducted into a new organization separate from the CIA. And they don't really explain this part at all too much, which is kind of cool because you don't know what's going on. He's sent on a mission to fight this organization collecting things sent from the future back to the past. So there's a time machine somehow involved, but it's secretly sent. And the way you communicate with the future is you record a message electronically, write down a message electronically, and the future will read it and then correspond with you accordingly. So it's kind of this weird paradox of, you can communicate with the future can't really communicate with you except to send devices back. So how that works out is kind of a little strange. He's hired by this new organization to hunt down these criminals assembling some kind of time paradox machine that'll end the world. So this is the crux of the story. So looking at the story, one of the things is, how do you film this type of film? Because they have this concept of reverse time. So basically, we live in the normal time going forward, and then they've invented this weird time machine that flux, and then it actually reverses. And the reverse people are going through why the normal people are going in regular time. So they kind of cross each other over time, or you can actually fight these characters, and it would be this weird concept of fighting a future version of someone with the current present time. So, or you're in the future and you're fighting your past characters. So it's, this weird concept of this reverse time. So you have this concept with the film, like how do you edit the film together to make it work? I think in most of the scenes, I think they do a really good job because then they kind of stitch together and you see a lot of these characters meet their past selves in a way in the future. So it's kind of like this nice character development over time of how the future is influencing the past. So editing wise, I think most of the scenes are done pretty well. They had the final showdown, which is this mass setup where they got the final parts and they're going to assemble this crazy bomb. So they have a lot of editing there, and that's kind of a really strange scene. It's definitely have a challenge from a director sense because you have to film people going forward and at the same time reverse. A lot of the reverse shots, if they're shot by themselves, they can kind of obviously reverse the film, and that's kind of what they're doing. They're blending reverse film with a regular time film and then combining the two. So editing wise and film wise, I think from a cinematography is a very deep challenge because you have to shoot the same shots and then blend the shots with CGI, make it work. When there's only a few characters, I think it works really well. It's very clear what's happening for the viewer. In this kind of last showdown with there's like tons of soldiers, I don't know if they really need all those soldiers. Did it make that much sense? I guess it makes sense, but then they kind of never explain how all these huge teams came together. Somehow the MI6 gets, this guy, the lead has a contact in the MI6, and all of a sudden the whole MI6 involved without any explanation. You're like, okay. So, one of the flaws I think in the film is they don't really explain who works for who, where is it going. So if you compare it to The Matrix, you kind of clear who's on the Matrix, who the Matrix is, what the Matrix is, who the computers are, and the rebels, right? And then you have a couple of traitors in between that kind of flip. And that's when you really never figure out, the protagonist, the secret group, MI6. I mean, kind of MI6 is a little clearer, but you're not quite clear. The only thing you're clear on is the villain, so he's really the guy with the most character arc, I would say. So, yeah, I think that's one of the flaws is the character arc. I didn't feel like it was story-wise. They have character arc, like the mother gets rescued, the lead figure out who he is, and he kind of becomes from this victim to, you know, self-willed self-determination. So you have character arc there a little bit. It's a little bit of that time paradox. You meet your future self and all. There's reverse, kind of creates the scenarios where there wouldn't be, you know, it's in the same film, so you kind of don't have that concept of character arc. The villain does have a lot of character arc. They show a little bit of the scenes from his childhood when he grew up in this secret uranium city. The Soviet Union falls, takes advantage and gets his first kind of mafia contract and rises to, you know, obviously one of the oligarch riches of Russia. So there's a little bit of a development there. I think they could have done a little bit better with how the villain comes about. That would have kind of shown his character arc and then somehow pull the other guy's character arc. I didn't feel like they did that satisfactory enough. You didn't really feel... The mother has some character arc again. She goes kind of from a victim to like a badass. I don't know, somehow it doesn't feel like satisfyingly put together for character arc-wise story. Story-wise, it's fine, it's fun and interesting, and it's a very long story to edit. The really interesting thing is because they have this reverse time and forward time, and since they don't explain these characters and their origins and these teams well, then you're kind of like always on your feet, like what's going on in the plot? Where's this going? What should I do over here? So it's really interesting. You have to stay on your toes and you really have to pay close attention. So that's a really smart film. So I like it from that aspect. But again, I think, you know, there's kind of some flaws. They don't really explain the time machine at all. They just go in the machine, walk in, walk out, and that's it. And they never show the mechanics of it per se. They show kind of the logic of how objects work with that very well. So you kind of get the sense of reverse time right off the bat. However, they don't explain that machine at all and kind of what happens to that machine. Is it really destroyed? Because there's two of them now, I think, in this parallel time. So it's like, did they really solve the issue at the end of the day? You don't really get the feel of that either. They have this really cool concept of joined finger as a symbol for, you know, figuring out who is on your side from the future to talk to your past, which is cool in the sense that the lead is able to send a message to himself in the future, but I mean, it's kind of hokey in the sense that anyone could figure this out and then obviously infiltrate and use it against someone. So I don't know if they've used that device very well. They use it only one time in the film. I was kind of expecting him to maybe use once or twice to kind of, he's in a dicey situation, who is he really working for, who should he work with, and they don't really have that per se. And you constantly have the villain kind of infiltrating the group, and so that's kind of a really interesting concept. Over time, the villain gets defeated, of course. Like any good film where you have the bad guy versus the good guy, usually the good guy eventually wins. But yeah, it's kind of didn't wrap up from the character arc-wise story, I think, and, you know, not explaining the time machine kind of works against it. Like if you look at Back to the Future, they put a lot of explanation how the machine works with the flux capacitor, blah blah blah, and that kind of makes the film in a way, because the doctor's always explaining how we get to this part of the film and da 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 da. I mean, maybe the audience were just dumber back then, so you had to explain it more. But it just kind of makes the story glue better. Because they don't explain the time machine well, it's kind of like some of these characters kind of don't come together as well, I think. Again, if they would explain, I think, a little better the villain's past from the secret city in the USSR to the 90s and then his future self, I think if they would have had a little bit more stitching together there, you would have had a good feel of the villain. I'm not sure what his motive is to end time. He's sick, but then it's like, he's just the egomaniac. It's just kind of this weird thing. And also how the future villains eventually how the future organization contacted him to put together this time machine is really weird as well. Because apparently in the future, there's two organizations. One kind of wanted to keep time as is, and another one wanted to go back and change events in the past. So these are the two groups, and you never really figure out who works for who. And so there's a lot of clear elements here. If you look at a Mission Impossible, it's very clear who the villain and the good guys are for the most part. Sometimes there's a mix-up. There might be a traitor in the mix. But there's kind of an explanation of where the team is and where it's getting to. And you have some of that, and there's always this mystery going on. Who works for who? Where is it going? Can you trust this person? Which is really well executed in the sense that you don't trust anyone in the film. However, I don't know, I think with the woman too, maybe she could have been fleshed out a little more as far as her motive. It's a little clear, but, you know, not totally clear. And she becomes kind of a badass, but she's always this kind of victim, kind of supermodel girlfriend. But, you know, obviously married this guy who's kind of an arms dealer, shady character. You know, I thought his character was explained the best. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. They leave to the end a lot of the threads are left open, I would say, for maybe a continuation. I don't know. Like they say, hey, I'm going to meet you in the future, and da-da-da-da, and you're like, what the hell is this about? You know, why don't you explain it now, at least a little bit? But they explained enough, I guess. So it's a fun film. I think I'd, you know, give it, it's kind of a B as far as character arc. I don't feel it kind of gels completely. There are things I'm thinking about now that some of the plot is in the beginning. You don't really know what's going on, and it's kind of resolved in the beginning for the end. So they are kind of, they're trying to do full circle. And some of the characters that kind of come together, but I think they maybe edited out some scenes that maybe would have made more sense together. I think I would have edited down the action scene in the end. I thought it was just overly big, kind of dramatic, which is fine. They kind of want to have a dramatic scene after you only had a few characters and now you have this big scene. But I think they could have worked that down more and then maybe explain a little bit more of the story along the way. Yeah, which is really weird because it's 2.5 hours. You don't feel like it's because it's a fast-paced film. You never know what's going on, so because you don't know what's going on, it doesn't feel long, which is interesting. So I think in a way he's kind of solved that, like when he did his World War II film, the name escapes me. Oh, Dunkirk. He did Dunkirk, and in Dunkirk there's this concept of the planes are one time, it's only a minute. The beach scene is maybe 2 days. And so the ground troops, the Navy, and the Air Force are 3 different time lengths, and he's kind of combined this into one film, so it has a really kind of cool effect. So it is the right director from an editing perspective to do this film. Story-wise, a little bit open-ended with the character arcs. I did like how a lot of the characters did develop, because you have a lot of them meeting their past selves, and they're like, oh, that's why that happened. Oh, this is why this person thought this happened. You know, it wasn't what it seemed at the time. So that's kind of a really cool element in the film. Obviously, I'm not explaining much to leave it open-ended so you guys can figure it out. Yeah, overall, I think it's a pretty good, fun film. I'd recommend it, and hopefully you guys like this. If you want to see more, you can subscribe, and I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.